Welcome to another episode of Mastering Cybersecurity, developed by baremetalcyber.com. Let's dive in. Consider another example that often appears in news stories, where an attacker targets a small online shop by guessing or stealing weak passwords for an administrator account. In ATT&CK terms, the initial access tactic might involve a technique like password guessing or credential stuffing instead of phishing, yet the story structure remains familiar. Once inside the administrative interface, the attacker may create new user accounts or change payment settings, which moves into persistence and privilege escalation tactics together. They could then install a malicious plugin or script that quietly skims credit card data from shoppers, which relates to collection and exfiltration tactics. If defenders later analyze the incident, they can map each major step back to specific techniques in the matrix and see which behaviors went undetected. This mapping turns a painful breach into a learning opportunity, because teams can talk about exactly which tactics and techniques need better visibility. For a beginner, understanding that even headline-making attacks can be broken into these repeatable building blocks reduces the feeling of mystery or magic. The ATT&CK matrix stops being a purely theoretical creation and instead resembles a menu of moves that real attackers actually choose during real operations. By practicing these translations between simple narratives and formal entries, you steadily build fluency without trying to swallow the entire matrix at once. Over time, that fluency helps you read new reports faster, connect patterns quicker, and participate meaningfully in conversations with more experienced colleagues. Defenders on blue teams, which are groups focused on monitoring and responding, use ATT&CK as a checklist for what they can actually see. Each detection rule, log source, or alert type can be mapped to one or more techniques in the matrix, creating a picture of coverage across tactics. If there are many techniques under a tactic like lateral movement, but very few mapped detections, that gap signals a potential blind spot worth serious attention. Security engineers can then prioritize building new detections or improving existing ones for those uncovered behaviors, directly guided by the matrix instead of guesswork. When incidents happen, responders can note which techniques were observed and how quickly they were caught, gradually building a history of strengths and weaknesses. This history can be visualized as simple charts that highlight where monitoring is strong and where investment might bring the biggest defensive improvement. For beginners joining a blue team, learning ATT&CK provides a mental map for understanding why certain logs, alerts, or sensors matter more than others. You can see how individual tools feed into a larger story about tactics and techniques instead of treating each dashboard as an isolated universe. That awareness builds better intuition for spotting unusual combinations of events that might represent a known attack pattern described in the matrix. In this way, ATT&CK supports not only technology choices, but also day-to-day analytic thinking on the defensive side. Red teams, which are ethical hacker groups that simulate realistic attackers, lean on ATT&CK to design exercises that mirror real-world behavior. Instead of improvising from memory or relying only on personal experience, they can select techniques from the matrix that match relevant tactics for a target environment. For example, a red team planning an exercise against a small cloud-hosted application might choose techniques that emphasize credential theft, cloud control abuse, and data exfiltration. They document which specific techniques they will attempt, then execute them carefully during the engagement while capturing detailed notes and evidence for later review. After the exercise ends, the team can report back using ATT&CK technique names, making it much easier for defenders and managers to understand exactly what was tested. Defenders can compare that list with their existing detection coverage map and immediately see which attempted techniques were missed or responded to slowly. For someone new to offensive security, learning ATT&CK teaches how to think in terms of goals and behaviors rather than tools and tricks alone. It also reinforces professional discipline because using shared technique names encourages careful planning, documentation, and responsible communication about simulated attacks. That clarity helps organizations treat red teaming as a structured learning process rather than a mysterious hacking show that only a few experts understand. In this way, ATT&CK supports offensive practice that genuinely improves defense instead of exercises that impress people without leaving lasting improvements behind. Managers and other non-technical leaders often worry about cyber risk but do not speak the detailed language of logs and packet captures. ATT&CK helps here because teams can create simple heat maps, which are colored views showing where tactics and techniques are better or worse covered. A tactic with many strong detections might be shaded in one color, while tactics with weak or missing coverage might appear in a different, more urgent color. Leaders can glance at this picture and understand that, for example, lateral movement and data exfiltration remain areas of concern compared to initial access. Security teams can then link budget requests, staffing needs, or project proposals directly to improving coverage for those specific tactics and techniques. This connection turns abstract cyber risk into concrete plans because investments are tied to named behaviors that everyone can see displayed on the matrix. For beginners who want to grow into leadership roles, understanding ATT&CK from this perspective shows how technical details support strategic decision-making. It demonstrates that learning a common framework is not only about passing exams or answering interview questions correctly. Instead, it is about enabling clearer conversations between analysts, engineers, testers, and executives who must work together to manage risk responsibly. When ATT&CK informs these conversations, organizations can prioritize more confidently and track progress over time in a way that survives staff changes and tool swaps. Threat intelligence, which is information about real attacker groups and campaigns, also connects naturally to ATT&CK and strengthens its value further. Many modern reports describe which tactics and techniques a group is known to use, often listing specific technique identifiers alongside narrative descriptions. When a team reads that a regional financial sector threat group favors a certain set of credential theft and lateral movement techniques, they can immediately check the matrix. They can ask whether their environment has good visibility into those techniques, whether previous incidents showed similar patterns, and whether existing controls match the documented behaviors. This process shrinks the gap between global news about sophisticated attackers and the everyday reality of defending a particular small clinic, retailer, or community organization. For beginners, this means that learning ATT&CK gives a way to read threat reports without feeling completely overwhelmed by unfamiliar tool names and command examples. You can focus first on which tactics were used, which techniques appeared repeatedly, and how those connect to the kinds of systems you actually care about. Over time, your brain builds associations between named techniques, common attacker groups, and defensive responses, making each new report faster to digest. The matrix becomes a stable reference point that anchors the moving world of threat intelligence to a consistent structure. That anchor helps organizations turn outside information about attackers into concrete questions about preparation, monitoring, and response planning at home. Because ATT&CK contains many entries, a practical question for beginners is how to start using it without drowning in detail. A helpful approach is choosing one platform you care about, such as enterprise desktops, cloud infrastructure, or mobile devices, and focusing only on that matrix. Within that platform-specific matrix, you might pick a single tactic, like initial access or execution, and spend time understanding just a handful of common techniques. For each selected technique, you can read the short description, consider a simple example in your environment, and think about how defenders might notice it. If you work or study in a specific domain, like healthcare, education, or small business retail, you can prioritize techniques that match realistic threats for that context. This narrow focus lets you build real competence where it matters most, instead of spreading thin attention across the entire catalog without depth. As your comfort grows with one tactic or platform, you can gradually expand to adjacent tactics or new environments using the same mental approach. Studying ATT&CK, therefore, becomes a long-term learning journey, not a cram session that ends with forgotten labels and stressful recall drills. Because the matrix rarely changes structure, every hour invested builds durable understanding that you can reuse across different roles and employers. Thinking this way turns ATT&CK into a supportive reference that grows with you, rather than a rigid checklist demanding instant perfection. To keep ATT&CK practical, it helps to connect the matrix directly to everyday work products like alerts, runbooks, and training sessions. A runbook is a simple, step-by-step document showing how a team responds to a given type of alert or incident, written in clear language. When teams label each runbook with the primary tactics and techniques involved, they create a bridge between the theoretical matrix and the concrete actions people take. Analysts can see that one procedure focuses on detecting suspicious login patterns under certain credential access techniques, while another emphasizes stopping unauthorized data transfers. Training sessions can also reference ATT&CK entries when walking through case studies, reinforcing the habit of naming behaviors according to the shared framework. Over time, dashboards, incident tickets, and even meeting notes begin to use tactic and technique names alongside plain language explanations. This blended style keeps communication inclusive for beginners while still building precision for those who need to design or evaluate controls. For organizations with limited time, even mapping a small number of high-impact alerts and incidents to ATT&CK can yield clearer discussions and better prioritization. New staff then inherit a living map that shows how the team actually defends against specific behaviors, not just a static poster on the wall. In that sense, ATT&CK becomes part of the organization's memory, helping people learn from past experience and apply those lessons to new threats more reliably. By now, the MITRE attack matrix should feel less like an intimidating grid and more like a story map of attacker behavior. You have heard how tactics describe high-level goals, how techniques and sub-techniques capture specific methods, and how simple narratives connect everything together. We explored how defenders on blue teams use ATT&CK to map detections, how red teams plan realistic exercises, and how managers track coverage through visual summaries. Threat intelligence reports also became easier to digest once you could map described behaviors and groups to named entries inside the matrix. You saw that starting small, with one platform or tactic, offers a realistic way to grow skill without drowning in constant detail. Connecting ATT&CK to runbooks, alerts, and training materials then turns it into a living reference that shapes daily work rather than a static chart. As you continue your cybersecurity journey, this framework can support conversations with peers, guide self-study, and help you evaluate tools more critically. The important thing is that you now have a mental model for reading the matrix, telling attack stories, and recognizing how different roles rely on the same shared map. Whenever new terms or headlines appear, you can ask where they fit in the ATT&CK story instead of treating them as isolated events. This concludes our walkthrough of the MITRE Attack Matrix for Beginners from the Mastering Cybersecurity podcast developed by baremetalcyber.com. Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.